And we are live. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late today. That's because I'm trying to find the articles that I wanted to discuss with you, but I accidentally closed them and I can't for the life of me bring them back. Hi there, good people of the interwebs. Hi there, Paulo Costa. Good luck with the song festival, mate. Chances are Portugal will not be represented by whomever is going to sing. Funny enough, this is true for most countries that participate in the song festival. Usually it's someone singing, and most of the people in the country are like, yeah, who cares? Anyway, it's early, not a lot of people are here yet. John won't be with us today. He had a few bad days of sleeping and all that. Hopefully he'll join us. He might join us in the chat. If he wants to join us in the hangout, obviously, there's always a spot for him here. And I have been trying to reach other people, but... and thank you, Paulo, for posting the stream. I indeed didn't post it in... how do you call the bloody thing? In Discord. But then again, people who are subscribed should have gotten a message that today's stream will go on. I have 4 concurrent viewers. Well, one of them probably is me and one of them is Paulo Costa. I am curious who else is there. So yeah, if you're in the chat, just give us a wave so we know that you're there. Help YouTube register you and all that. Because apparently if you don't type or if typing is slow for a long time, you don't count as being a viewer. That's really weird. I mean, you'd think they'd realize who's a viewer or not. Anyway, so today I wanted to have a small talk about how in major Western cities the governments have all but given up on taking care of crime. What do I mean with that? Well, it seems a normal attitude for the bigger cities to limit the amount of protecting the police officers do. This isn't really 100% correct, but trust me on this one, it's rather just to call it that. Now, to begin with, in New York we had the whole thing about the bail reform not too long ago. In January 2020 there was a new law, and basically they're saying, well, okay, you know what, if you commit a crime but the cost of the crime, the damages or whatever you've stolen is under a certain amount, well, you need not worry, because you won't have to post bail to be freed from whatever it is. I said 2020, it's 2019, by the way. I'm not quite sure what I'm as I said, I read this whole thing and I'm trying to find it back, and I'm trying to find the numbers, but I can't find it, unfortunately. But for a certain amount of money, if your crime is below a certain threshold, yeah, the police can arrest you, and then within 24 hours you'll be back on the street, and they hope you'll come when the judge calls you, but if not, they'll come and look for you eventually. This is an attitude that has been mentioned by a few YouTubers as well, like I'm not sure if his name is Officer Tatum, or I forgot his name, but he's a black YouTuber. He used to be a police officer as well. Interesting stuff. He talked about this, but other YouTubers have talked about this as well. It's like, okay, so now I commit a crime, but if I stay under a certain threshold, they'll let me walk. This, however, then creates the following problem. Punishment is a way to try and prevent people from committing crime. Well, because is the crime worth the punishment? Is the punishment worth the crime? But if you then say, you know what, yeah, certain crimes we don't care about the punishment, then basically what you're telling people is, okay, you can do this, and yeah, no one really cares. So what reason do you have not to commit the crime? And hi there, people who are joining. Once again, it's nice to see that there are 6 people now. Please say something in the chat, otherwise YouTube doesn't really count you, funny enough. Oh, it counts you now, but in half an hour it just tell me that you weren't here at all. I don't understand YouTube, but then again, I don't think anyone understands YouTube. So what happens in New York is that we see a rise in certain crimes, especially the smaller crimes. Now we call it smaller crimes because, as I said, the financial cost is considered to be low, but in all fairness, if you get mugged on the street, the financial cost might be low, but it's going to leave a mark. This is not only happening in New York. And obviously we can talk about the stupidity of Obviously we can talk about the stupidity of American politics, but this is true in just about every major Western country. Hi there, Ludicrous. Good morning. Well, it's almost midnight. Hi Paolo, miss me? Okay, so you two go trash talk a bit. But if we look at other major cities, for example, London. When Sadiq Khan became mayor of London, one of the things he did was more or less break down on stop, ask and search. Eventually they reinstated it again, I think in the end of 2018. But yeah, that reinstatement went slow. And because of the immense surge in crime, you are not now allowed to have a potato peeler with you because that's considered a knife, which is considered a weapon. Mind you, stabbing in New York have gone up. Sorry, not New York, London. Stabbing in London have gone up and have even surpassed New York. Acid attacks. London has more acid attacks than Bangladesh, which is interesting considering Bangladesh is where the whole concept of acid attacks are, how do you call it? Part and parcel. Yeah. So there are quite a few problems in London. And bringing back stop, ask and frisk might be a good issue, or might be a good idea. But whether it really works is, well, your guess is as good as mine. Knives of pieces and acid of peace. Why did you remove that, Paolo? Come on. Nothing wrong with that line. I'm not quite sure what is causing this. Knives of peace and acid of peace. Yeah, that's a good one too. But if we look at, for example, the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, they also have decided, kind of like kind of like New York, that if your crime stays below a certain financial threshold, it's not counted. And if it's the first time you do it, you won't even get charged. Now, this is a very interesting thing, and it hasn't gone through 100% yet, and I can't find the article, which is quite annoying. But yeah. Good morning, Anxious, and congratulations with your daughter. I hope she has a great day today. Well, funny enough, we're talking about London, Amsterdam and New York. But look at, for example, and Anxious Aussie, nice of you to be in the chat, because maybe you can confirm or tell me where I'm wrong. But even in Australia, I think in Melbourne, there are large parts of Melbourne that are suffering under crime of certain people, and the government doesn't address it. They seem to think it's not that big a deal. And there's nothing wrong with hanging out with your friends and dinner and movie and giggles. And again, 16. 16 is a big deal in America. Is 16 a big deal in Australia too? And hi there, Johnny List. See, I shouldn't be focusing on the chat too much. So there is this thing that major Western cities are basically standing down when it comes to crime. Now, this crime is mostly done by minorities, funny enough, because, let's be honest, if it's not minorities, it's not going to get this blanket treatment of... tolerance is probably the best word for this. And it doesn't make sense, because the minorities might be the vast part of the crime committers, but they're also the vast part of the victims of these crimes. Obviously not when they steal in a shop, but robbing on the street, attacking people on the street, it's usually the minorities who are both perpetrator and victim. And by not addressing these things, we are exacerbating the problem. These things escalate. And indeed, anxious shoplifters know it. If they can get out of the door with something under a certain amount of price, the cops won't investigate. This is true in New York. This is happening in, Australia apparently. I wasn't 100% sure, but I kind of knew about Australia as well. They're talking about this in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. London more or less uses these tactics. What the hell is wrong with our politicians? Because it's easy to say, well, it's the criminals, it's the minorities, it's the this, it's the that, blah, 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 blah. The problem isn't the ones doing it in this case. Well, it's a problem that they do it. But they have been given carte blanche. It's being allowed. And if you tell people, oh, okay, well, I don't want you to do this, but if you do this, I'll not stop you, then obviously they're going to do it. If you take away responsibility for action, hell, if you take away a responsibility that people themselves should carry, if you take away that responsibility, people will behave irresponsible. And then, at the same time, we're not to talk about this. It's almost as if our politicians do everything they can to make an unstable, unsafe society. Now maybe that's just me saying this. Maybe it's just me thinking that this is the case. But we all have noticed that certain groups can get away with just about everything. And other groups aren't even allowed to talk about it. Because we have things like hate crimes. If you say something that I dislike, I can call the police. And in the UK, they actually have a division for it. What was it? The non-crime hate crime. I think it was called that. I have to look it up real fast. But yeah, people get scolded for committing non-crime hate offences. Yes, non-crime hate incidents. Sorry. My bad. So the police in the UK has actually arrested, well, not arrested people, but scolded people, addressed people, taken them from their work for questioning for non-crime hate incidents. And I'm like, it's a non-crime. As in, it is not crime. But real crime is being allowed. Something tells me there's a thing going on in the Western world. We're going into a more and more totalitarian state where it's more offensive for you to disagree with your government than to actually steal from someone. Think about that for a second. It's okay for you to steal, but if you make a joke against certain groups, the police will knock on your door. Well, that's unfair. They'll knock on your door when you steal too. Yeah, but apparently not if what you steal is under a certain amount. Because as long as you stay under that certain amount, well, they're not going to bother you. Because it's not a big deal. Who has a new video up, by the way? Oh, okay. I was hoping. Okay. Maybe Ludacris has a new video up. That would be nice. Now it's difficult for me to do this stream all on my own because this is a topic that I have a lot to say about, but it's difficult to streamline my thoughts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give some examples. So people in the UK, let's talk about Harry Miller. Who is Harry Miller? Well, Harry Miller is a, how do you call this? A person who has been, he's an ex-officer, by the way. He has been slapped on the wrist because he allegedly had a transphobic tweet. And it's not illegal, but people complained, and therefore it would be recorded as a non-crime hate incident. As if there's not enough crime to deal with, they're now dealing with non-crime. Thought police indeed, Ludicrous. And this is kind of what's happening. And we talked about, John and I talked about it in one of the streams some time ago. This is what happened with, how do you call him? I'm really terrible with names. Silly Scottish dude. Count Dankula. Who has been fined for £800 for making his dog do the Nazi salute, even though in the whole video it's very clear it's a joke. But the judge deemed it not to be a joke, because obviously the judge is a better judge of joke. I mean, obviously he's a judge, so he can judge whether something is a joke. And that Count Dankula said he didn't do it to offend. Well, obviously that doesn't matter, because the judge kind of said, no, you did mean offense. I can read into your mind. And so he fined him £800, which Count Dankula then said, okay, well, I'll not pay it and I'll go for, how do you call it? I'll appeal. But then the government said, oh yeah, you know what? You don't have to pay it. We'll take it from you. Something, by the way, that as far as I know, is not a legal action. But yeah, no, if the judge says it's okay, then apparently that's normal now. There is something really wrong with us. I mean, we have politicians that have no problem with ignoring rules, for one, but throwing the book at us for things that aren't bad. I think this is the way is the judge in the case of Mr. Miller spoke out against it and basically berated the police going after Mr. Miller. And basically the judge said, well, wait a second, in this country we never had a Cheka, a Gestapo or a Stasi. We never lived in an Orwellian society. So what the hell is going on in the UK now? Because apparently the UK is living in an Orwellian society. Mind you, not just the UK. This is happening in Germany, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Australia. I am pretty sure this is happening in Sweden. Not so sure about Denmark and Norway. Poland doesn't seem to be affected by it too much, nor Hungary. It seems to be that all the countries that do this the most are somewhat left of center when it comes to their politics. But that's obviously just a coincidence. I mean, yeah, it must be a coincidence, right? It is weird for me to see this happening. I mean, if we look in the Netherlands always had a tolerant view when it came to drug offences, depending on which drugs you use. I mean, did you have weed with you? Yeah, you know what? Hash, no problem. As long as you don't create an incident, as long as you don't misbehave, the cops will let you do your thing. Now, if you go and puff a blunt in their face, yeah, I'm sorry, mate, you're being stupid. Or if you're pissing all over the street or shouting or blah blah blah, then they'll knock you down and they'll take you with them. But on average, if you just sit quietly and you smoke your blunt and you're not upsetting anyone, they don't act. Which, for the longest time, I thought wasn't a bad idea. But unfortunately, what we do see happening is that because certain crime is now acceptable, other crime becomes more prevalent. Because the more you're going to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to act on that, the more certain things start happening. And unfortunately, and this is true, this is weird. Okay, I seem to have had a hiccup in my stream according to OBS. Not sure if you noticed anything. If the tax revenue service does it, it can't be illegal. Well, there you have it. That's an old joke, though. I mean, governments don't like people stealing. Why? They hate competition. But apparently they don't, because if you steal up to a certain amount, that's all right. Obviously not for everyone. I mean, there are definitely people who are not allowed to steal. And I guess it's all of us. Thank you for letting me know, Paolo. I don't know what happened. I was checking my settings and all that. Yeah, everything seems to be more or less okay, so I don't know what's going on. Now, I put up a video on my main channel yesterday about a group of thugs attacking a girl in New York, broad daylight, open street. And because of that, they okay, one moment, because someone sent a message in between, lost my train of thoughts. So back to the beginning. Made a video about a bunch of kids attacking a girl, broad open street. People came running from far away to come and join in the fight, and no one stood up. This is what happens when certain crime is made acceptable. Because up until a certain point, it's okay. And beyond a certain point, it is not. But that divide, what do we accept, what do we not accept, isn't always clear cut. Now, it's obvious when you go into a shop and you're allowed to steal up to $900. Yeah, you don't steal for $900, you steal for $850. Because that's under the threshold. But when is something a fight and when is something a robbing? Well, the video I posted yesterday, the girl got robbed. Why? They attacked her. A bunch of guys. I think it was about 15 guys, maybe a bit more. They knocked her over. They jumped on her. They kicked and beat her. And then someone stole her shoes. Someone stole her debit card. And someone stole her phone. Doesn't that then make it aggravated assault and robbery? Well, I would say yes. But other people would say, nah, it's just people fighting. The double standard in this is constantly something that we have to be aware of. It's very difficult because this is something I have happened to me myself. I was a few months ago with the wife and the kids. We were out somewhere and we got into a spat with a bunch of women of minority. And obviously one of the things they told me is that I shouldn't tell them that they should go home because they live in the Netherlands. Mind you, I never said they should go home, nor did I bring it up at any point, but they did. Yet they were completely fine with telling me that I should go because it's their country now. And then they call the cops because they feel so entitled, and the cops come to my house and they ask me what happened, and I tell the whole story, and the cops go away. But none of the women were approached by the police. I even asked the police that I wanted to record them. I would put them on record. I wanted to, file a report against them. Yeah, no, well, that's useless. Don't bother. That's not helpful. But I have the police at my door because of what happened. And I'm the one who left because they were so misbehaving. And none of the police seem to think that maybe it's not the one leaving, but the one starting the fights that are the problem. It's small things. It's the police not acting against small crimes. It's the police acting out really harsh against people for having wrong thought ideas. But only if you're of a certain group. Because another group can't have those wrong thought ideas. Mind you, if you're in New York and you know that stealing up to $900 is acceptable, and you're a white guy and you steal for $800, trust you me, if you are of decent background, you will be arrested. Because the law won't be applied equally. It is like they want to drive us to despair. Why have the police if they don't apply the law equally? And I think you're correct, Anxious. I really do think that this is, whether it's conscious or not, but I do think that one of the effects will be that people will stop having faith in their governments, in their police, in their housing situations. They feel that they might start doing things for themselves. Now, in the Western world, in Western countries, all of them except for maybe the United States, governments had the monopoly on violence. But they're losing that monopoly. But they're not willing to fight to get it back. So at a certain point in time, you can be a very old man in your house being attacked by a burglar, and then you fight the burglar out of your house and you get arrested because you used violence. And the burglar will be set free because he's a victim. And if you can rhyme something like that, then you're a smarter person than I am, because I can't make heads or tails of it. But this is more and more and more what we see happening in most Western countries. The example I gave a moment ago actually happened in the UK. But I know of a story like that in the Netherlands. In Denmark and Sweden, women using, pepper spray to protect themselves from rapists are arrested because how dare you use pepper spray? That's not allowed. But it's okay to keep your arm stretched at arm's length to say stop. Because that will work. But if it doesn't work and you do call the police, it might not be the fastest. And if you don't talk to the police in the right way, well, that might just be a hate incident. Because how dare you be negative towards certain people? There is an incredible... I'm trying to find the words. There's an incredible amount of damage being caused in the Western world. And it comes from our politicians. The criminals are... they're an effect. They're not the cause. The criminal will be compensated for the systemic oppression experienced while you go to jail. Well, yeah, that is not completely incorrect anxious. I mean, I can still remember, and this is from, I think it was from Australia, when, what's the blonde name? I haven't seen much of her work in the last few, years even. There was this blonde Canadian girl. She called herself an attack helicopter because that was her gender. And she went to Australia and she wanted to talk to people in the areas of certain mosques. And she talked with some Muslims who were perfectly fine to talk to her, no problem at all. But there were others that might not have liked it. So the police basically told her to leave. Laura Southern, that's the woman. So she got told by the police to leave. She wasn't offensive. She just talked to people. And if people didn't want to talk to her, she left. Yes, yeah, thank you, Johnny. But the police told her she had to leave, because if she didn't, and thank you, Ludicrous, the police told her she had to leave because if she didn't, she would be arrested. This happened to Avi Yemeni as well, both in Australia and in the UK. This happened to Tommy Robinson in the UK, and I think it was in Austria, but I can't remember. It's almost as if wrongthink is a far harsher crime than attacking people. Now, the UK is, in all fairness, very close to being a fascist state, or not so much a fascist, but definitely a regressive state, because they actually block people from getting into the country because they might not like the ideas of what these people bring with them. Obviously not if you're an imam preaching hate towards non-Muslims, then you can come in. But if you're an, I don't know, person out of Australia talking about Identity Europe, well, obviously you're a problem. There was this girl, I forgot her name, in Afghanistan, that a Christian girl that needed to flee the country. And the English government didn't want to give her asylum because it might cause problems with certain groups within the country. Well, can you imagine that? So you're not going to give refugee because certain groups will have a problem with that, but you will let those people in even though other groups in your country have a problem with that. Because there are enough people in the UK that want a stop on the taking in of Muslims from all over the world. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying the UK should do this. But how double is your standard if you're going to say, well, I mean, that Christian girl, which has an obviously reason to want to flee Afghanistan because of Pakistan, can't remember, because she will be in dire threat. There's a good chance she'll get killed. But we won't let her go into the UK because, well, there will be some unrest with the people from that country who might want to do her harm as well. But you can't say the same for white people or English people, because let's be honest, white is a useless term anyway, but English people having a problem with people coming into their country. Well, yeah, but that's not an issue. Because English people don't go out to riot. But those people that come from the same country as that girl, they go out to riot. So basically what they're telling you, why are you not rioting? But don't look at it like that. Now don't get me wrong, I don't want you to go out and riot. Hell, the only thing you can do is make people aware in your country and let them vote for other politicians. But how stupid is it? We're not going to let someone in because someone else might riot. But aren't the one rioting the ones that break the law? And yes, Johnny List, Australia is bad. I've read quite a bit about it, and it's amazing. And somehow, I mean, look at what happened to New Zealand. A guy shoots up 2 mosques, I think. I think he shot up 2 mosques which is a crime. Don't get me wrong, it's a terrible crime, and the guy should be sent to jail, and all the more power to the government for trying to put him to jail. So what do? They blame all New Zealand gun owners, and they need to hand in their guns. Yeah, but how are those two things related? But when groups of certain minorities act criminally, we're not going to speak about the group because they were just lone wolves. It's the constant double standard, and it's harming our society. And lately I'm talking more and more about oikophobia, but this is, funny enough, this is oikophobia. This is, we don't want to be positive about our own culture. Our own culture is not good enough. And I don't understand how people can get away with this. I don't understand how we can have politicians or a media that basically says, well, Johnny English stole a car. It's a big crime. We should make a big deal out of it. But Johnny Foreigner did it, and he had a hard childhood, or he comes from a different location. It's not acceptable, surely, but it's not understandable how we can have constant double standards. And mind you, in no way am I saying all foreigners are bad. In no way am I saying all Muslims are bad. In no way am I saying all non-foreigners are good people, because you have arseholes everywhere. But the only way you can diminish the effect of arseholes in a society is by standing up to those arseholes. If we don't stand up to the arseholes, they will escalate. In the Netherlands, we have refugee camps for people who come to the Netherlands to ask for asylum. And we have now 2 refugee camps, asylum camps, for anti-social refugees. Because they have misbehaved so much in the normal refugee camps that for the protection of the other refugees in those camps, we had to put them apart. And I'm like, why the hell are we even giving them an extra camp? I'm sorry, you come here to claim refugee status. You're misbehaving so bad that we can't keep you in the same refugee camp as other refugees. Why don't we boot them back over the border? No, we're going to give them their own camp. Now, this is happening in the Netherlands. I'm pretty sure this is happening in other countries as well. It's amazing. Give them an inch and they will take Europe. Anxious Aussie, you're almost correct. Give them an inch and they'll take the Western world. Because let's be honest, Australia and New Zealand aren't Europe, but they have, well, similar problems to say the least. Hell, I mean, Australia wanted to give an island to refugees so there they can then be stationed for a while, and that wasn't good enough. No, you had to let them into the mainland. Denmark basically said, okay, if you're a refugee and you come here and you have wealth with you, you're not going to get free food and free housing because you have wealth, you can afford it. And that wasn't acceptable. But if you stop paying your rent, then you have a problem. At this point in time, in the Western world, everything that is Western world is considered a negative thing by our own politicians. And Paolo, you're correct. In America, they still have guns in most states. Why do you think the politicians in America are so dead set against gun ownership? Why do you think the Democrats really want to take away your guns? And don't get me wrong, it's not just the Democrats. There are Republicans who want to get away your guns, take away your guns. Because in all fairness, today it's left, tomorrow it's right, but they both want control. And the only way for them to not be able to get that control is because the populace, well, there's a difference between a citizen and what was the other word now? A free man. It's not the right word. I'll see if I can find it though. There's a quote. Oh, hush. Yeah, I can't find it. The only example I can find now is denizen, but that's not the right one. Never mind. Anyway, basically it boils down to this. A free man can apply freedom. And of course, because you live in a society, there are rules, because we have to work together with people. So there will be things that we can and cannot accept from others. But how can you be a free man if you can't disagree with your own government? Because if disagreeing with them is considered a non-crime hate incident, how much freedom do you have? I think one of the jokes I've seen a few times go around is, "Oi, do you have a license for that opinion?" But it seems that this is where we're heading to pretty fast in the Western world. Anyway, I'm noticing I'm ranting a lot at the moment, so I'm not quite sure if I should continue with that. Maybe I should have prepared this one a little bit better. But I do hope my point is coming across, even though it might not be as eloquent as it could have been. I'm trying to prevent myself from making this about oikophobia again, which is difficult because, in all fairness, it is. But yeah, it's almost as if by giving it a name, you are playing for a certain audience, and that's not really the goal. Anyway, anyone in the chat has anything interesting to add? I'll wait a few seconds. John unfortunately isn't with us today, but he'll be with us soonish again, I hope. Let me see. He sent me a message. He sent me 3 messages. Haha. Okay. There you go. That might be. We might have a reason why there was a slight hiccup in the stream a moment ago. I'm not sure. Could be that. I don't think so. Maybe it is. Well, I have mayors sabotaging the national economy, supposedly in the name of the environment. Well, this is another thing that continuously happens. Thank you for bringing this up, Paolo, because then maybe I can talk about this. We are putting so much money into green energy, even though none of the major green energy plants has been cost effective. And no, Johnny, his microphone is fine. He's a little bit under the weather. So just like I was away for a few streams earlier this year because I was under the weather, now John needs a little R&R time. You guys are a tough crowd, you know. It's hard work. But yeah, back to the electricity thing. We are putting so much money into green energy, solar and wind, and it's absolutely not working, and we're losing money on it. It's the only reason why they can keep doing it is because they subsidize it. And funny enough, if we look at France and Germany, Germany has gone, they haven't gone complete green because they're only a fraction of green energy in Germany. But the price of energy in Germany is twice as high as the price for energy in France. Well, the difference obviously being is that France is using nuclear power, which is a lot cheaper. But somehow, good investments aren't what sells. They're all in it to make it look good, not to actually do good. Well, it's taxpayers' money scam. That is true. It's not completely finished, but then again, I am not sure the election is either. I'm not sure. Okay, in light of the stupid of troublesome theme, I am still trying to finish my video on the Irish election. Okay, those two are one, and I read them in the wrong order. I'm sorry. Well, I'm looking forward to it, Ludicrous, because I am interested in how it is going in Ireland, because I have the feeling that the Irish politicians are also very good at doing everything that the average Irish person has somewhat of an issue with. But, well, obviously you can't say it, because then you're some kind of ist or ob. And you can't say you're against wind energy or solar energy, because, well, what are you? Are you some eco-terrorist? Do you want to see the world burn? Never mind the fact that the amount of pollution coming from creating wind turbines or solar panels is way more than, let's be honest, nuclear power. Ah, but nuclear power is very dangerous, very dangerous. If something goes wrong, well, thousands of people die. Well, when 8 Mile Island was a problem, and this happened roughly at the beginning of the whole nuclear power thing, there was this the China Incident movie, which was talking about how nuclear power was so very dangerous. The 8 Mile Island incident didn't have any real impact. Ah, but then there was Chernobyl. True, there was Chernobyl. Chernobyl was a man-made failure. And even then, I mean, yes, okay, Chernobyl itself, the city, has been off limits, but the amount of people dying because of it isn't nearly as high as we're being told. Ah, but look at Fukushima. Well, in Fukushima, there were 2 plants. One of the plants, I think it's called Fukushima Daigma and Naindo. I'm sorry, I have to look this up again. Out of the 2 plants, one plant had a problem, but the other was okay. Well, okay is a big word. I mean, let's be honest. They were hit by a tsunami and an earthquake, scale 9. Now, I have to bear with me for a moment, but there is Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima. Well, I had the other name, Naidi, I think. Diani, I don't know. Where is it? I had the name here. Ah, yes. Fukushima Daiichi and Fukushima Daini. And there is Onagawa and Tokai. One of them had a problem. Fukushima Daiichi was the only one that had a problem, even though the other ones were roughly in the same area. Why? Because they had a very secure building, but they got hit by an earthquake. Power earthquake was 9. I don't know what the scale was, I can't remember now. And they were hit by a tsunami. Lots of people died. Yes, obviously, because they got hit by a tsunami. Building nuclear area. Well, there is some risk in that, yeah. But then again, Japan... Oh, sorry, I should read it out. In my opinion, building nuclear in areas of high geological activity seems pretty silly. Yes, Anxious, you're correct. But at the same time, Japan is an island. They only have so much space. And yes, one of the Fukushima plants, the Fukushima Daiichi plant, is still leaking radioactive water, which sounds like a terrible thing, but it's not really as big a deal as people make it out to be. Funny enough, Fukushima Daini went through a complete and controlled cool down. And they were both hit by the same thing. The difference being that Fukushima Daiichi didn't build a certain protective wall to protect it against tsunamis, because they didn't think the chance was going to be that high. And I'm sorry, Johnny, I can understand how you're against nuclear, and I can understand how you think the risk is far too high, but the reality is wind energy, in the last 20 years, more people have died because of wind energy than because of nuclear energy. And no, I didn't hear about the nuclear plant meltdown in Switzerland. When did that happen? No, I have to look into that now. I am of two minds on nuclear, but totally against Australia taking other ways to store. Well, I mean, coal is fine, I have to admit, but nuclear is cheaper. And it's cleaner, funny enough. And it's safer. Oh, that's the Lucens reactor. Yeah. Which was a small experimental dual-use nuclear power reactor. Yeah. I remember having heard of it. Obviously, now that I'm reading it again. Sorry, not as if my mind was that good. But yeah, no, that's at the beginning of the nuclear age. We're talking about the 60s. So yeah. Yes, nuclear is actually cheaper than coal, Johnny. Uranium, and if we would go to thorium, they are very common materials. So they're far cheaper than coal and gas and oil. To build and to run, Jody. Yes. No, I'll see if I can find it. To build and to operate nuclear is, as far as I can remember, far cheaper, far safer, and far more common than coal, because it takes very little space, so you don't need huge plants. I mean, people always think that nuclear power plants are huge. They're not. The biggest thing about them are the cooling towers, and those towers are nothing but a tower. It's just for the water to cool down in and to escape the steam in. They cost many billions to build. A nuclear power plant doesn't cost many billions to build. A nuclear power plant isn't that much more expensive to build than a conventional coal burning plant, to be honest. Well, I'm reading this on The Age. The Age is probably on... Nuclear power could be cheaper than electricity produced by coal and gas, says, or could be. This is Australia. Nuclear power will also do less environmental damage and will be much safer, it says. The report by British nuclear power specialist John Gittes was released in full yesterday by Science Minister Julie Bishop. I'll keep this apart for myself. The report calculates that if Australia waits for about a decade until 9 modern power stations have been built overseas, the cost will drop to the point where nuclear power is competitive with gas and coal. I would say it's already competitive with gas and coal, to be honest. Hi there, Hylel. Welcome to the stream. Coal power plants cause more death per year than Chernobyl disaster during its whole... Yes, you're correct, Hylel. This is unfortunately true. The same is true for wind power, actually, and solar power as well. But solar and wind, we don't see the incredible pollution that comes with those because we are not privy to the process of them being made. Okay, so the age is an Australian thing, and here they say that building a power station immediately would cost between 3.5 or 2.5 billion Australian, what is it, dollar? I think you guys use dollars, right? But the amount of power produced will be far higher than coal or hydro would do, and power hydro and oil and cause about 1,000 times as many deaths as a nuclear station would. So, in health cost, in life's cost, nuclear is by far the safest. But financially speaking, they're also a lot safer. Well, I mean, Johnny, in all fairness, natural disasters are natural disasters. But if we take Fukushima, Fukushima is a natural disaster, which is terrible. But in all fairness, it's not the power plant, the nuclear power plant, that caused a lot of death. The death caused at that event was the tsunami. Okay, well, I'll look into the costs of a nuclear power plant a bit further. That's all right. Do you believe Wikipedia? Let me see if I can find it on Wikipedia. Probably not. This is something I should do up ahead, apparently. For power generation capacity, capital costs are often exposed as overnight costs per watt. Estimated costs are for gas, oil, or combined cycle power plants. It's about $1,000 per kilowatt. Onshore wind, $1,600. Offshore wind, $6,000, so $6,500. Solar, $1,000, solar $1,000, battery storage $2,000, conventional hydropower $2,600, geothermal $28,000, coal 3.5 to 3,800, advanced nuclear apparently 6,000 per kilowatt. Now this is something I find interesting because here it says indeed nuclear is far more expensive. Which kind of makes no sense considering that nuclear power is the cheapest of them. And how do we know they're the cheapest? Because out of all the countries in Europe, the power in France is the cheapest. And they are mostly nuclear. And yes, they should. Anxious, they should. But there's another problem with wind and solar, and this is something they always skip over. The sun doesn't always shine, and the wind doesn't always blow. And guess how much energy you will have when those two things aren't happening. No, it's very difficult to find This is something I should look into. I'll look into it later. By the way, Johnny, maybe it's easier. I'm trying to do it now, but this is not really that easy. Emissions, efficiency, and reliability. A pellet of nuclear fuel weighs approximately 6 grams. However, that single pellet yields the amount of energy equivalent to generated by a ton of coal, 120 gallons of oil, or 17,000 cubic feet of natural gas, making nuclear fuel much more efficient than fossil fuel. In addition, nuclear power plants operate more reliably than other power generating facilities. Nuclear power plants work at full capacity of 92% of the time. For comparison, consider the operating time of other generating sources, coal plants or natural gas plants, at roughly 50% of the time, wind at roughly 30%, and solar at roughly 20%. And yeah, well, I mean, Johnny, if you can get the main, how do you call it, main fuel, then yeah, no, I mean, fossil fuels and coal can be cheap. But I really do think that nuclear is cheaper than fossil. Cost reported in mils per kilowatt hour, 1 mil equals 0.001 cent, or 1/10 of a US cent per kilowatt hour. While operating costs for nuclear power plants exceed the cost of other electricity generating power sources, the total cost is less than most. The average total cost. So, I'm not quite sure what they're saying here, because they are saying it's more expensive, but it's cheaper. So I really have to look into it a little bit harder. As far as I know, it's cheaper overall, but average costs in mils per kilowatt hour report in 270 are, in order of increasing costs, 10.29 for hydroelectric, which is relatively cheap. Then 24 for nuclear power, 31 for gas, and then, why don't I see coal? 35 for fossil steam plants. Oh, I guess that's coal then. So, well, in all fairness, wind and solar aren't even, they're not cost effective, but even on small scale, they're simply not practical. Wind or solar are interesting if you have your own batteries, so where you want to go completely off grid, then those are a good idea. But then again, wind and solar both have a lifetime of 30 years, and after 30 years they no longer are useful. Yes, indeed. Most solar plants have a very short lifespan of 20 years, and a nuclear plant of 20 years. Hell, Fukushima was what, nearly 50 years old, and it was still running as normal. And nobody talks about replacing that because it's too old. But yeah, I agree. Anxious when it comes to wind and solar. The only reason they can exist at all is because of subsidies from governments. Now, relatively speaking, obviously, solar is very cheap because you only have the investment. Once you have the investment, after that, you're simply producing. Yeah, but the initial investment is often not carried along. People talk about operational costs. Well, a solar panel doesn't have operational costs, but they do have a production value. Whereas nuclear power plants have a higher operational cost because, in all fairness, you need highly specialized personnel for it. But even with that, they're still cheaper than all the other options. Well, apparently except for hydro, but not every country can have hydro dams. they are quite effective as well, let's be honest. I'm trying to find out where I can get clear numbers on the costs, but unfortunately I have to admit it's very difficult to get clear numbers. I mean, they'll tell you that the fuel is a lot cheaper. Yes, we know, because you need far less of it. But the problem with building nuclear power plants in areas that are isolated is that you need a lot of energy to transport energy. So you don't want to have your energy production too far from the place where you use it, because transporting energy kind of diminishes the amount of energy. For example, if you put in 10 at one end and the distance comes out as 9, at a distance it comes out as 9 or even 5. So you need to push in more energy, because there's a lot of energy loss in transport. Someone has explained it to me once, but I have to look into it. Actually, this is an interesting thing. I guess I'm going to make a video about this. And yes, you need an infrastructure, obviously. And it's not just as simple as just putting long cables. I mean, yes, long cables will work, but you will lose energy in transport. So, Johnny, thank you for asking this question, because even though I still think that it's a lot cheaper, I have to admit that I can't find it easily, so I'll look into it more. Maybe you're correct, and I'll definitely make a video about this. But we know it's, comparatively speaking, cheaper, safer, and the worst part is, with the technology we have now, we can do more. Because this is the funny thing, and this is something a lot of people don't even know, but only 98%, only 2% of the nuclear fuel is being used. 89% is nuclear waste. This is where, for example, the salt reactors come in. Because the salt reactors can still burn that 89%. Up to, I think, 10%. A very low number. So, yeah, there's a lot more possible in nuclear. I still don't understand. Because, in all fairness, if we look at Fukushima, Fukushima was an old plant. It was built in the 70s, I think, in the late 70s. We now have a lot more technology, and with that we can do even better. I thought the Brexit was the salt reactor. Different salt, but okay. But yeah, the salt reactor or thorium salt reactors can actually burn nuclear waste, because nuclear waste is 89% plutonium or what's the other one? Plutonium and uranium. Sorry, uranium. But for normal nuclear reactors, they can't burn more than 2%, because after that, the process becomes very unstable and very difficult. Wherein with the thorium or with the salt reactors, the process is far safer, so they can repeat it for a longer period of time. With so much salt, they won't need to use chlorine on the chickens. Anyway, thank you for your question, Johnny. I have the window open on nuclear power. I will leave it open for me, and I'll try to make a video about it on my main channel on Modwayne Alleron. And as always, criticism is always welcome. But yeah, no, it's interesting for me to look into, because I remember having read this. I remember having seen this, but I can't find it, so I can't confirm it. But yeah, it's double though. But yeah, the cheapest one is hydroelectric. But yeah, not every country can do a safe hydroelectric thing. I mean, I live in the Netherlands. We can't do a hydroelectric. We can try to do hydroelectric from waves, because the tide goes in, tide goes out. You can grab some energy from that. But the downside with doing that is that it will actually influence the patterns of the water in the world, which is actually a dangerous thing. This is, by the way, also a problem with wind energy, because we're taking energy out of the wind, and the wind is one of the cooling factors in the world. So yeah, if you take energy out of the wind will cool us less. Funny enough, wind energy will cause global warming faster than CO2 does. But no one talks about that, because that's not part of the story. And I'm not sure if the not criticizing, just thinking out loud was meant for me, Johnny. But even if you were criticizing me, mate, I'm thankful for it. Trust me. I'm serious when I say this is something for me to look into, because I know it, but I can't find the right stuff that I want to say. So maybe either I'm not knowing it correctly, so I could be wrong, let's be honest, I'm only a human, or I need to look into it a little bit further and I can find the right stuff. Either of them could be true, so this is a good topic for a video. I'm always grateful when people give me good topic for videos, because it gives me something to do. So yeah, no, politicians going for green energy, and not one green energy source is actually green. I mean, I remember having made a video not too long ago where wind power was considered rather, how do you call it, dirty. I think I uploaded a video on my main channel, 2 days ago, about the destructive influence going green has on China, because that's where most of the metals come from that are needed for the green revolution. And in the places where these metals come from, the lands are seriously tainted. Anyway, before I go back and forth on the same topic, anyone want to say something? If not, I'm going to call it quits. But I do once again like to thank you, Johnny, because yeah, never a bad thing to question what you think you know. And I don't know how long it'll take for the stream response. It's usually about 30 seconds. And if those 30 seconds are up, Modwayne, I hope you enjoy my new video. I will. I probably will. I do enjoy your stuff, Ludicrous. You are dangerously undersubscribed. I mean, more people should enjoy your work. You do. Then again, I can say the same about me and blah, blah, blah. That's how it goes. But yeah, no, I do enjoy your stuff. Well, thank you, Johnny. This is why I say criticism is always welcome. I don't want to have an echo chamber. I don't want to only think that what I know must be true. I need to hear other opinions for me to say, oh, wait a second. That's how we keep ourselves thinking. That's how we keep ourselves sharp. The last thing we can do, or the last thing we should do, is believe. Reality isn't a religion. Nothing wrong with religions, but religions and reality are not the same thing. Anyway, I'd love to thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you all next time. And criticism, as always, is more than welcome, so keep it coming. Ask critical questions and we can try to find the answer. And I hope to see you all next time.